Hello and welcome to Managing Through Crisis, the webcast where we bring you insights of Harvard Business School faculty to help managers lead their teams and firms through the COVID-19 crisis. It's April 24th and parts of the US are deep into their second month of self-isolation and confirmed COVID-19 cases are approaching the 1 million mark in this country. Testing has definitely ramped up in many places, but one issue that still remains is a lack of access to personal protective equipment for frontline healthcare workers, this term PPE that we've all become used to hearing now. Just this week, Time published the results of a survey of 978 hospitals across 47 states, and the findings were astonishing, really. 61% had less than a week's worth of N95 masks, more than half had less than a week's worth of surgical masks, and 67% had less than a week's worth of thermometers. And that list went on and on. The situation is really dire to the extent that some people have decided that it's time to take matters into their own hands. One of those people is here with us today. I'm happy to welcome Sophie Bai. Sophie is in her second year at Harvard Business School. She hails from China originally, but she's been in the Boston area for the past decade or so. And she is the founder of PPEople First. That's people spelled PPE, People First. And that we're going to talk more about what PPEople First is all about. That's what we're here to talk about today. Also joining us today is Jeff Bussgang. Jeff is a professor at Harvard Business School, and in addition to teaching entrepreneurship at HBS, he is the co-founder and general partner at Flybridge Capital Partners, and he's been helping Sophie and PPEople First get up and running. Thank you both for joining me today. It's great to have you.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
So we've got a lot to talk about, Sophie. You've been hard at work for several weeks now. I've seen a lot of publicity around what you've been doing, so you're really getting people's attention around a really important topic that I was just sort of teeing up there in the introduction. But I need you to start maybe by just describing for our viewers, what's PPEople First, what's your mission, and what kind of impact have you been able to make so far?
Yeah, so PPEople First is a group of HBS students. We came together as volunteers trying to solve the problem of the massive PPE shortage happening here in Boston area. So we're procuring the PPE that is much needed from China and delivered to the hospital's frontline workers in the Boston area. So that is what we do. And so far, we have been able to raise $3 million and convert it into 1.7 million pieces of PPE that are being distributed or in the process of being distributed to frontline workers here in Boston.
And that's going to hospitals all around the greater Boston area?
Correct. So we have distributed to more than 12 institutions, including larger hospitals like MGH, Brigham Women's, Beth Israel, Boston Medical Center, but also including some senior facilities like Hebrew Senior Life and some of the smaller clinics as well.
So there's a real lesson in here, and this is part of the reason that we've invited Jeff on, not just the fact that he's working with you, but he's an expert in startups and entrepreneurship. I do want to talk about the kinds of things that you faced while you've sort of entered into this startup enterprise. What was let me just ask you, what made you decide to do this? You were just sort of sitting around in quarantine and said, I see a problem, I need to solve it?
So when, HBS announced post-spring break that classes are moving online, I started to realize that the situation is getting more and more serious. And a lot of my friends from undergrad are actually currently doctors in MGH or Brigham, and they're telling me the dire situation about the PPE shortage they're facing. They have been reusing or recycling masks for weeks. So that's when I started to know there's a huge problem here. And my friends back home in China whose family businesses have been, large medical supply distribution. So I was just trying to connect the dots. There is a need here, and then there's a supply there in China. So I just I think there's a way to help.
So Jeff, let me turn to you for a minute. Just tell us, how did you get involved and what role have you been playing with PPEople First?
Yeah, Sophie came to me to share with me her passion for this concern and the fact that she could help. And so I began to work with her and have had the pleasure of working with her and her team, which she fondly calls the elves, Sophie's elves, for the last couple of weeks. And just as you said, it's been like a startup, and we can get into how amazing these students have been under Sophie's leadership in creating this multi-million-dollar medical distribution business from scratch out of the Harvard dorms in under a month. But I've had just the pleasure of helping, in particular, connect her with a lot of the folks in the Boston community who could help and provide some of the support for the system that she's trying to design, whether it's a foundation like the Boston Foundation, which has been the entity that stood up the nonprofit to accumulate the money and the donations, or a fintech like Flywire, which has helped send the dollars very quickly and convert them into RMB into China, or a warehouse company, Grossman Marketing, who's served as our warehouse and logistics partner. So using my network in Boston and linking up with the students and Sophie's work has been really the focus that I've had.
Sophie, let me ask you, I'm just curious as to how you even knew where to begin in doing something like this. Most people that are home in quarantine appear to be watching Tiger King. You know, you obviously have a lot more ambition than that. But like, where do you even, like, you see a problem, you know you want to solve it. How do you even know where to start?
Well, first, I don't have a TV in my dorm, so I can't really watch Tiger King. But so I reached out to my friend first, asking, you know, what is the supply available right now, given, you know, the situation in China had been contained, that a lot of the focus has been, you know, supplying internationally. And her family business has been supporting some other governments out there. So I got a list of supplies that she could able to provide, and I reached out to, you know, Professor Bussgang, as well as my MIT professor, Bob Langer, who connected me to some senior folks at the Brigham Women's Hospital. That's how we first started to test out a first order with Brigham. So Jeff had been you know, really enabling us to work really fast to be able to get the supplies for Brigham to start. And then after we have seen the supplies, you know, cleared Chinese custom, cleared US custom, and arrived to Brigham safely just within, you know, 8 days, we were, you know, really excited to ramp this effort up and to get more donations, to get more capital to scale up to other hospitals as well.
So Jeff, as you've been working with Sophie and her team, are there particular things that you see here that have helped them to be successful? Are there sort of certain ingredients that they've been able to tap into that you see are kind of the important things for success of an endeavor like this?
Well, first of all, Sophie and her team are very, very uniquely suited for this problem. If you go into the procurement department of a typical hospital in Boston and you find a middle manager sitting in a cubicle who's used to purchasing supplies from BJ's or Costco, they don't speak Mandarin, they're not up all night on WeChat, they don't have relationships with the white labeled medical distributors in China, they're not accustomed to the dynamic environment, which is today more like a commodities trading floor than a well-organized procurement process. So there's a complete mismatch between the way that PPE procurement is happening today in a very competitive, dynamic global environment, mainly in China, and the way that the hospital systems in the US and the governments and as well have been set up to do very normal run-of-the-mill state-of-the-art procurement. And so Sophie's team has completely bridged that gap between those two methods. And then the second thing I would observe is that they're doing it like a startup. They're taking a page out of the TEM first year playbook, running experiments, operating very dynamically, very creatively, and very entrepreneurially. And so those two things, that sort of new dynamic procurement system that they've been able to stand up, and then the approach of taking one step at a time, experiments, and willingness to fail, willingness to try new things has been really what's made this so successful.
Sophie, what are the things that have surprised you along the way here, both in a good way and in a bad way? I'm sure you faced some obstacles. You know, what were those? But also, what are the things that you have found were sort of easier than you thought they might be?
I think the overwhelming support that I get from, my classmates, my best friends here, as well as, from Jeff, who has connected us with so many amazing organizations or individuals are willing to help is beyond me. Like, I never thought, just within 10 days, I was working in my dorm day one with zero capital to, by day 10, I was working with a team of 12 of my classmates with, more than $2 million. That just all happened in 10 days. So that was, a really good or amazing surprise to me. I guess it is challenging, right? It's more than moving from goods from, like point A to point B. It's way more complex than that, because here we're dealing with medical supplies. There's so much regulation around it, right? Both from the China side and from the US side. So what makes it challenging is it's not a typical procurement job. You need to understand the technical aspects as well. So that's part of the medical team's job. And also you need to understand the custom regulations, both from the China side and from the US side, which has been changing every single day, right? So it's basically a job combining procurement, import, export, and medical expertise. So that's what makes this so challenging. So I think, the number one area that we found challenging to start with, as Jeff said, was the dynamic market situation, right? It is a seller's market. It's a free-for-all market that we are competing against other governments and other countries in this world, for the same supplies. So the speed to cash is really crucial. So we were able to get the help from Flyware, which is a Boston-based fintech, to help us really speed up the payment flow process to be able to, get those supplies as fast as we can. So, I think we have to operate in a way, have the mindset as don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Just, to get the as much as we can at the best price, as we can. Just because speed is so crucial, because as some of the healthcare experts have said, that each day delay of PPE delivery translates into 30 Massachusetts residents dying. So we just simply don't have time to wait or to run the regular process that has been set up here in a more traditional way. So I would say that's number one. Number two, I would say really is when you think about all of these new factories were built or converted in January in China, they were really supplying domestically, right? So when you think about the certification processes or the testing processes, they were really Chinese standards. And Chinese standards and FDA or US standards are two completely different systems. So how do you communicate those two systems to each other has been challenging, and I think has caused a lot of challenges for the US buyers to buy in China, just because, beyond the language barrier here, then you really have to understand the technical specs of those masks. Like, let's take the surgical mask, for example. The US is so used to ASTM 123, which is an American standard, but it doesn't exist in China, right? But then you have to look into the Chinese standard to figure out the test report, the specs of the filtration capabilities, or all those different type of, the functions each mask have to be able to match what is the equivalent, and are those exportable and are those importable at the same time in the US. So having that communication back and forth has been challenging, but because we have overcome that, made us be able to procure large quantities in a faster way. I think number three really is about trying to get the logistics right, which I think, given the pandemic, a lot of the international flights or planes have been canceled, right? So being able to get the stuff on the ground from China to the US has been a lot slower than before. And also domestically within the US, just because of the pandemic, UPS or FedEx of the world have cut personnel. So sometimes the overnight delivery turn into 3 to 4 days, which delays the delivery as well. So there are, I would say, different problems along the way that we're facing every single day, but we're also as a team of problem solvers trying to figure out the ways to solve those.
Let me pull the lens back a little bit, Jeff, and ask you, it's amazing what People First has been able to accomplish, what Sophie and her team have done in such a compressed period of time. Do conditions like the ones that we're in today make it easier or harder for ventures like this to get started? I mean, people see the problem. Does that help the situation where there's more of a willingness for others to support them and the network to kind of rally around them?
I think for sure, if you take Sophie's earlier point about how quickly we were able to raise $3 million that we raised, certainly the crisis was a catalyst for that. And so being able to bring capital together. Secondly, talent. Sophie is normally such a talented person. Normally she would have so many other demands on her time, and similar with her classmates. But the fact that in the middle of this crisis, they had not only capacity, but also the passion and the desire to prioritize this effort as such an important priority, even above classes. And if any of their other faculty members that are watching this have Sophie or her team in their class, I hope they'll take note that this team has been just working around the clock. Again, you wouldn't be able to convene this powerful group of 10 HBS students, almost all women, by the way, who really abandoned every other thing going on in their lives and have put 10, 12, 14 hours a day into this venture. So I think the notion of the fact that this crisis has got everyone's attention has been able to allow us to pull talent and capital together very quickly.
Do you think a situation like this has the potential to be a catalyst for entrepreneurship in the broadest sense of the word? Will we see a new wave of entrepreneurship coming out of a situation like this where we know things aren't going to go back to the way they were before?
Yeah, I see this in my venture capital work at Flybridge. There are a lot of startups that have emerged taking advantage of this new trend or a new reset, whether it's work from home, learn from home, the advent of some of the medical needs that are being surfaced here. We have one company in our portfolio that is known to probably some of your viewers called Love Pop, which had been a greeting card company up until a few weeks ago. They pivoted to suddenly make face shields using their precision manufacturing expertise and capabilities to make PPE face shields for local area hospitals. There's a company up in Lawrence, Massachusetts that was an apparel company doing apparel and sportswear for Under Armour called 99 Custom. They pivoted to making gowns, and they're now producing gowns for hospitals, former Mass Challenge company. So there's a lot of very dramatic creative moves being made out there in the entrepreneurial ecosystem.
So Sophie, what has the reaction been of the hospitals that you've been able to help out?
We have received overwhelmingly heartwarming thank you notes and messages from everybody, that from hospitals to like families, from doctors, nurses to the husbands or family members of those frontline workers. They were telling us, you guys are literally saving our lives. So I think that's a very powerful statement we have received, and it just makes us feel what we're doing have made a very immediate and direct impact on people's lives. And that's what basically keep us going and working around the clock and trying to get as much as we can.
People know that this disease, if I may, people know this disease has impacted people of color and inner cities even more dramatically. And just coincidentally, just as Sophie has friends who are doctors and clinicians, my daughter also has friends in similar positions, and we donated some PPE to one of the facilities where a friend of my daughter's works. And she called my daughter this morning, insisting that she talk to me to thank me so much. And she told me that not only did the PPE would really help them save lives and do a better job of screening the patients that come into their clinic, but it would also allow them to become a testing site, which is really an extraordinary thing, because if you don't have the proper protective equipment, you can't test COVID patients. And so some of these basic goods and supplies that are suddenly allowing these clinics to serve their populations even more carefully is just really very heartwarming.
Let me ask this of both of you. Do either of you have any advice for somebody who's watching who might be thinking about doing something of their own to address, you know, an aspect of this crisis that they want to try and fix?
I'll start. I think, you know, it is a difficult time for everybody. And things have been so different, and it poses a lot of challenges in every aspect of your life. I would say there are so many ways to help out, whether from PPE or from, you know, helping local communities, helping local businesses. Like, we have seen many, even students on campus have started so many different initiatives. I would say my recommendation would be just don't think of starting big, because I started small. I started helping my friends to find some masks, and then when, you know, I approached Jeff, and he just put me on this rocket ship that everything scaled so quickly, and we were able to do this on a larger scale. So I think, you know, as long as you have some idea helping people around you, and then you will find the resources or people around you who are able to enable you to do something greater.
Jeff, do you want to add anything there?
No, it's beautifully said. I think starting small gestures, acting local. One of my colleagues at Flybridge is involved in an organization that's delivering meals from takeout restaurants to hospital workers. That's a win-win, because the restaurants have some excess capacity and they love the idea of helping out. And obviously the hospital workers and frontline caregivers need to be fed and cared for. So I think anything that people can do that are listening, some people just struggle sometimes to know where to start, but just something as simple as delivering a cup of coffee or a breakfast burrito to a hospital or caregiver would be just an amazing way to start. And then you never know where it could lead. As Sophie said, what had been just a kind gesture of getting some masks in the hands of some friends has now turned into this multi-million-dollar medical distribution business. And she has made and her classmates have made just an extraordinary impact on the Boston community as a result.
So Sophie, I'm going to give you the last word. Where can people reach out to help people first?
Yeah, so we have 2 donation links. One is through the Boston Foundation, the COVID-19 PPE Fund. Another one is GoFundMe, which is the more, I guess, millennial-friendly link. So as you said in the very beginning, the situation is still dire, right? The state needs more than 2 million pieces of N95s every single week, and we are still, you know, not at the peak yet. Right, so it's going to be a marathon, and we're still trying to help as much as we could. So any help, big and small, would really help us to help the frontline workers to protect themselves and save more lives.
That's great. Sophie, Bai, Jeff, thank you both for joining me today, and I wish you continued success with People First, Sophie.
Thank you so much, Ryan.